These people killed my men, and they're gonna pay the price for that. They are. I mean, by definition, they were our enemy, but the Lord showed me that they're not His. He showed me that they're the victims, and that they're the captives that Jesus came to set free.
Wow. Retired Major General Kurt Fuller, thank you for your service to our nation. But even more than that, thank you for your service to the kingdom of God. Because you're probably in rare air. God's used you on some of the largest platforms from a military standpoint, representing our nation. But I don't know very many of them that are as passionate about the Great Commission as you.
Well, thanks, Tyler. Appreciate that. Appreciate you having me here, too.
I'm excited to talk to you because one of the things that I've been bothered by, especially in the time that we're living in right now, is that there's not very many Christians that are educated on some of the complex issues that are happening geopolitically. And I feel like every nation I've ever asked you about, you know intimately what's going on and you have an answer. And it's not just your conservative, political commentary answer that you give. You're actually given a spiritual heavenly perspective, and I think that's so important. How'd you get to this place in your life where you started to look through a biblical lens instead of just the natural lens?
Well, that came out of the battlefield, out of combat.
Mm-hmm.
So after I retired, I counted, I think I whittled it down to 18 times that I was miraculously spared on the battlefield, that I should have been dead. And there was no other explanation for how I survived it other than God intervened and kept me alive. And so, when that happens once or twice, it's pretty significant. But when it happens over, a dozen times and keeps going, it does serve to strengthen your faith and make you realize how dependent you are on the Lord for survival in those kind of situations. So, yeah, that's what did it, I'm sure.
I think you told me a story. You were in a helicopter. You're just getting machine gunned at.
Yeah, so we were flying out. This was in Iraq. We were flying out in Al-Anbar province, western Iraq, where a lot of bad stuff has happened. But we were flying at night in special operations, 2 Blackhawks, and so we were real close to the ground, and we were going really fast, super dark, moonless night, and we were sitting in the floor with the doors open, our legs hanging out. It was summertime, super hot, and we had some detainees on board that were pretty smelly, so we kept the doors open so we didn't get ill from their body odor. And as we're flying along, we're wearing our night vision goggles, just looking out across the countryside. And these technical vehicles drove up on a ridgeline. They're just little Hilux pickup trucks that they put machine guns on the back of. So those guys drove up and they started shooting at a U.S. position that we didn't even know was out there. Well, it turned out that this position was a mechanized infantry company, so they had Bradley fighting vehicles, and I think they had some tanks too. But when the enemy started shooting at them, they returned fire. So they're shooting these chain guns off their, Bradleys, and big, giant bullets, and every fourth one is a tracer round. So you can see every fourth round, but the other 3 that are coming at you don't see. But the bottom line is, as we were flying across the desert, those guys opened fire on the enemy, and the rounds hit the ground and ricocheted up to us. And we flew right through this cone of fire from all these different vehicles that were engaging. There were bullets everywhere, and we were just seeing the red ones. But they went over us, under us, behind us, in front of us. I mean, looked like they're coming right at me. And then they don't, we flew out from, flew away from the bullet before it struck us. But I mean, it was really intense. And yeah, that was just one example.
So you have 18 miraculous life and death moments where the hand of God spared you. Are you praying in that moment? Are you like, Lord,
No, I mean, you're in the middle of something really intense. You know, you're fighting. You haven't got time to pray. You're not thinking about that at that moment. But then when you realize how close you are to dying, of course, yeah, you ramp that up. But, yeah, I mean, most of the time in combat is kind of boring. You're sitting around waiting for something to happen. But when it does, it's no longer boring.
From a spiritual perspective, you know, it's a conversation that is happening more frequently now, but hasn't happened a lot in the past. And we need men like you who actually have field experience to translate the best practices in the mechanisms of warfare to a spiritual perspective.
Right.
And I think God's given you some blueprints, some downloads on how we can actually be equipped as the body of Christ, as men and women in the kingdom, to fight the enemy that's against us.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Matter of fact, I mean, I just came to this realization recently, but all of the doctrine, the strategy, the tactics that we use on the physical battlefield absolutely apply to spiritual warfare and the spiritual battlefield. Now, there have to be some modifications made, but the principles are all the same. And so, as an example, you know, you don't go into battle without putting your armor on. Well, the Lord instructs us, you know, in Ephesians 6, he talks about the armor of God and what all the components are, and the fact that you have to put it on. Mm-hmm. No one's going to do it for you, and so yeah, you've got to go into battle with that protection. If you don't have it, you're going to be a casualty. And I think a lot of people that get involved in spiritual warfare, which is pretty much everyone, well, it is everyone. There's no one alive that doesn't experience some sort of interference from the kingdom of darkness. And when that happens, if you're not prepared for it, and you haven't trained for it, you haven't gotten yourself ready, then you're not going to perform very well. The outcome's not going to be what you want. So I think there's a lot of preparation involved and training that needs to happen to get people to the proficiency level that they need to be at to overcome these kind of threats.
Now, you've outlined 7 steps to perfect this process in our lives. Actually, the scripture, Jesus says, be perfect like I'm perfect. It's not that we're ever going to get there, but it in some ways means that we should study to show ourselves approved and actually, you know, in our own lives, read the word of God and have it as a weapon of mass destruction against the enemy. But one of the steps that you have in this 7-step process is to build a cross-functional team. And I've seen you in a group of men. One of them, you know, sort of raised their hand and was like, tell me about the camaraderie. What if there was a weak person? And you said, I like to only be with elite people. And I thought, from my perspective, it's one of the wisest things, because when you're around people that are better than you, you're going to get better. They're going to call you higher, and you have an invitation.
Exactly right. Yeah. Well, and it's a basic leadership principle too, that, you know, if you surround yourself with good people and you give them the room to do what needs to be done, to teach people, tell people what you need them to do, but not how to do it. And you bring some brilliant people on board, and they're going to do it way better than you could have ever done it by yourself. So, yeah, that's absolutely right. But I think the key point there is that the Lord gave us all the tools, all the weapons, and all the techniques that we need to be overcomers. I mean, 7 times in the book of Revelation, to he who overcomes. And if you look at what those people receive, then you want that. Yeah. You want to be an overcomer. And so he's taught us how to do it. We just need to get good at it. We need to practice. You can't master any task unless there's been enough repetitions that you can do it without having to think about it or go down a checklist or something like that. And so that's what I think the Lord is prompting us to do, is get ourselves prepared and then get in the fight, because he gave us a mission and he told us he's not coming back until that mission is complete. And so why are we waiting? Mm-hmm. So I think it's time to get on with it. And again, I think to do that successfully, the new believers need to be trained and discipled in how to operate in this battlefield domain, this spiritual domain, in the supernatural, which is different than the physical battlefield in terms of the enemy and the enemy's capabilities, but not different in terms of doctrine, tactics. It's this. In fact, I mean, you got to wonder, did a lot of the military stuff actually evolve from the Scripture? Because they're so nested, they're so similar, the techniques. Anyway, I think it's really interesting. The more I think about it, the more I'm learning and being able to piece this together.
There's a leadership principle when you're training somebody, you want to take them to this place of having an unconscious competence, a basic understanding that they can do what they do without thinking about it.
Right.
And when we're surveying the land, you talk about the ability to become so vigilant against the attacks of the enemy that there's just this unconscious ability to discern what's going on. I ask a lot of pastors this, what's the most demonized nation? And most of the time they'll say America, because one reason is because it has the most idols. And we're almost desensitized to all the ways the enemy's infiltrated our society.
True, although I would totally disagree. America's not even close to the most demonized society in the world.
I'm going to ask you which one, but not yet. Let's get to the idea of, like, you gave the example of, like, you brush your teeth and, like.
Yeah, so I think the point there is about, again, it's about training, but it's about getting yourself to the place where you're so confident and experienced in this kind of fighting that when you make contact with the kingdom of darkness, your reactions are immediate, they're instinctive, they're actually a conditioned response to a threat. So, I mean, everybody encounters things like that in their daily lives. Like somebody cuts in front of you in traffic, you instinctively take your foot off the gas and put your foot on the brake. And you don't think about that. And when you get attacked by evil, and 9 times out of 10, it's some kind of thought that gets dropped into your brain. And that thought leads to, if it is carried through, it leads to sin. And so the second that thought comes into your head, you got to get rid of it. And that's the kind of instinctive reaction I'm talking about. Most people don't even realize that thought came from somewhere bad. Mm-hmm. They think, well, that's just me. That's my brain. No, that's some demonic spirit putting that thought in your head. And if you acknowledge that and realize that you're being attacked, then you can respond properly. But most people aren't, their head isn't into this concept that there's a spiritual battle going on around us all the time. And therefore, when they get attacked, they don't even realize it. So I give the analogy of on the battlefield, if soldiers were, out there doing their normal daily stuff and they get attacked by the enemy and they don't respond, mm-hmm. they're all going to get killed. Yeah. And the same is true in the spiritual thing, although you're not going to die physically, but, that sin could lead to spiritual death for sure.
Wow, that's a really amazing perspective. You had an encounter where you wrestled a principality over a region.
Yeah. In fact, that's what got me started on this whole spiritual warfare study, because I realized I can never let that happen again. And so bottom line, it happened in Afghanistan, and I was praying as I was in a helicopter and flying across the battlefield, and there was some pretty serious stuff going on, big gunfight. And I was praying, and this thing got inside my head. Actually, it didn't happen while I was praying. The prayer was the cause of it attacking me, because I'd been going across the country claiming that ground for the kingdom of God and claiming it. These people belong to Jesus, not to the devil. and asking the Lord to, pour his spirit out on that place and change the people's hearts and make them stop killing each other and all that. And definitely that spirit didn't like it. So when I got over that battlefield that day, I was thinking about what I needed to do to resolve that situation, but that's when that thing attacked me, and it got inside my brain, and it told me I needed to jump out of the helicopter. And it was unbelievably powerful. I mean, it was overwhelming. I was mentally incapacitated for about, 45 seconds maybe, and I was terrified. And when I realized I had my hand on my harness, I was going to jump out of that helicopter. And then I realized this isn't natural. It's unnatural. These aren't my thoughts. I don't think that way. So if it's not natural, it's supernatural. So I said, okay, now I know what to do. And as soon as I started praying and I said the name of Jesus, the attack ended. But it led to about a year of trying to figure out why was I vulnerable? Mm-hmm. Because I thought I had on the full armor of God. I thought I was operating in the Lord's righteousness. I thought I wasn't doing anything wrong, but the Lord showed me that I had unrepented sin in my life, and that's why that thing got access to me. And the sin was the spirit, the heart that I was entering into the conflict with, because it was all about vengeance. These people killed my men, and they're gonna pay the price for that. And the Lord, and I saw the enemy. Well, I call them enemy. They are. I mean, by definition, they were our enemy. But the Lord showed me that they're not His. He showed me that they're the victims, mm-hmm. and that they're the captives that Jesus came to set free.
Wow.
So yeah, that was a really significant event in my life, because I had to. Well, It drove me to study spiritual warfare, because I said, I can't let this happen to me, and I need to understand the principles involved to prevent it again. And so, yeah, I went into a deep dive on it, all the way back to books written in the 1300s. And I got a massive library on it now, but I learned a lot.
The learning from that actually had to deal with the topic of forgiveness in your heart.
Absolutely. And that unforgiveness was the unrepented sin that I had to unload. Now, this is the real kicker, is that the Lord showed me not only not only are they not your enemy, but you have to forgive them. Mm. And that is counterintuitive. You think, hey, they didn't even ask for forgiveness. They don't deserve forgiveness. These are the most evil people that I've ever encountered. Why would we do that? And the Lord showed me very clearly that it's not for their sake you forgive. It's for your own sake. Mm-hmm. And Jesus said, if you don't forgive, then my Father in heaven won't forgive you.
Yeah. The time you spent in, very dangerous combat situations, you go back to the United States. Is there PTSD?
No. And that's a real blessing. I'm so thankful for that. I mean, my wife says I do have some dreams occasionally, but I don't remember them, thankfully. I'll ask her, what was I saying? She says like, you said, bring up the machine guns. And I have no idea. I don't remember any of it, but obviously I was dreaming about combat. But no, I don't have any trauma. I definitely experienced trauma. Anybody in a combat zone is going to. The question is, what do you do with it? How do you process it? And you can wallow in it and be a victim of it, or you can use it to make yourself stronger. Mm-hmm. And there is a way to come out with post-traumatic growth instead of post-traumatic distress, you know. So I think I was successful in doing that, but it wasn't me. It was obviously the Lord. The Spirit in me is what keeps me balanced there. But no, I don't have any issues like that.
Most pastors are not going to have the same perspective as a globe-trotting freedom fighter for the U.S. would have. So, of course, their vantage point's going to say, well, I think America's the most demonized because they have a limited view of the world.
Right. I mean, you know, there are entire continents that are just completely dark. I mean, look at what's going on in Africa right now. There's not a country on that continent that isn't fighting.
Let's talk about some of them. South Africa.
South Africa is the most recent, but I mean, you look at Sudan, you look at the Democratic. Well, like I said, pick a country. And
we have a lot
Somalia.
of friends in Mozambique.
Yeah.
And what's going on in Mozambique, I just know from getting to hear the stories personally, is horrible. I mean, it's an all-out assault on the general population, but also Christians and churches.
Oh yeah, I mean, persecution of Christians in these places is dramatically accelerating, and not just persecution, but they're killing them and burning down the churches.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, if someone thinks America is the worst country in the world for evil, they haven't been around very much.
The situation that happened in Congo a couple of weeks ago, I mean, it was like basically an ISIS affiliate group went and totally obliterated as many Christians as they could and piled them up. We've seen basically the same thing happen in Syria, which is in the Middle East, where they literally, I don't know if you saw, I saw a photo of the stack of bodies that this group came in and killed Christians, burned down their churches, and stacked up their dead bodies. I mean, that's almost unfathomable.
Well, yes, that's true. It's hard to imagine, but the reality is it's been happening for hundreds of years. I mean, you can go all the way back to 1099, and the First Crusade was a response to Muslim invasion of Christian lands.
Yeah.
And they weren't coming in to evangelize. They were coming in to take over by force and forcibly convert people to Islam. That's how Islam spread so rapidly during that time frame, is by the sword. And, you know, go back and look at the history. I mean, they made it all the way to Vienna, Austria. They were going to take over the capital of Austria. If it wasn't for the Polish winged hussars that came and counterattacked, all of Austria would have been Muslim. They took a good chunk of Spain and held on to it for hundreds of years. It was all Christian. Matter of fact, you look at the Holy Land, look at the Levant, all of those countries, Lebanon, Syria, what is now Israel, they were all Christian nations before Islam spread across there.
Can you give me your perspective of what is going on in Israel?
I believe that when Satan set up his kingdom here on earth, he put his throne in Jerusalem. And I think that's the source of the whole thing. But I mean, clearly, you know, are you asking about the Palestinian situation?
Yeah. I mean, well, it's good to have that, what you think is the historical framework or backdrop of the nation of Israel. And it's obviously the most contentious spot of land on the earth and has been forever. But yeah, even more specifically, it's been a year and a half or, you know, since October 7th. And there's a new administration in the United States, and there's some policy changes and there's some different efforts. I'd like to hear your perspective. Like, what's the right solution?
Well, I think there's no way. The two-state solution is complete nonsense. It's never going to work.
Because one state is, no matter what, a terrorist organization.
Yeah, and the Palestinians have adopted Hamas as their government. And, of course, it's been going on for so long that they've got, 3-4 generations that have been trained in jihad. and indoctrinated into the idea that Christians and Jews all have to either convert or be killed. And so you can't coexist with people like that. In fact, the truth is there is no such thing as a Palestinian. That term was invented as a political tool to weaponize against Israel and anyone who supports them. The people that are called Palestinians were just Bedouin Arabs, and they actually, a whole bunch of them got kicked out of Jordan because they tried to overthrow the king. The problem with trying to move the Palestinians out of Gaza or the West Bank is nobody wants them.
Yeah.
And nobody wants them because they've adopted a terrorist doctrine.
Yeah.
Entirely. I mean,
Yeah.
their whole culture is about terrorism.
I mean, their constitution, that
Yes.
is the purpose, that is the stated purpose of that government.
Correct.
Who do you foresee taking them? Because what do you think is going to happen? It's going to just be a stalemate for the next 5 years, or do you think that there's going to be a push and an eradication of that region, and then it's going to either belong to Israel, or there's going to be, I don't know what's going to happen to that.
Yeah, I have no idea either. I mean, nobody can predict the future in that level of detail, but I do believe that the Palestinians will have to leave Gaza. And the reason why is because there's not going to be anything left you can't live there.
I mean, they're demolished. Where do you think they'll go? Like,
well, there's a lot. I mean, any Arab country ought to be happy to take them, But it's not like one nation has to absorb all of them. Everybody ought to open their doors to them and let them come into Arab countries where they can learn about the moderate Muslims who actually do get along with Christians and Jews. And if they can get into that mindset, then, they can not be terrorists anymore, which would be the goal in my mind, is how do you convince them to abandon this doctrine?
yeah. When people talk about the potential of a World War III, has there been a time since October 7th where you thought, we're on the cusp of it in this moment? Or have you held a pretty peaceful stance? Like, it's, this is just the process. Things are going to work out.
I think the threat of another world war is always going to be there. And here's the issue. It's not about another war. It's about whether we have a multipolar world or a unipolar world. And if you look back through all of history, anytime we were in a multipolar world where there were multiple powerful nations vying for supremacy, we had a world war, or a big nasty war, maybe not, termed a world war. But if America falls off its place as the world's superpower, we will have a multipolar world with lots of conflict that is likely to lead to another world war. And so that's why America has to stay strong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I love the concept of thinking through what position is other nations and who's the biggest threat to some of what you're talking about. Is it obvious that the USA is the world's only superpower?
Well, now it is, but there are people that are coming mighty close to mirroring our capabilities. Rand Corporation does a big study every year that compares all the threats to the U.S. to our military capability and says, how are we okay? Are we able to address all this? Well, for the first time in the history of that study, last year, Rand wrote that if any two of these four countries were to join together against us, they could likely defeat us. And those four countries are China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran. Any two of those forming a military alliance against us, and we got problems.
Wow.
So that's a new thing on the street these days, and we got to pay close attention to that. Now, when you look at each of those four individually, China is a massive economic threat and espionage threat. I mean, pretty much everything they have, they stole from us. I mean, you look at their new aircraft that they are just put on display. It looks an awful lot like an F-35 Joint Strike Fighter. You know, in fact, it looks exactly like one because it's what it is. Luckily, they don't have all the technology in the cockpit we do, but anyway, though they're an economic threat, and they're a threat because of
they lack creativity, but they're very good at mockery.
Yeah, and they're very aggressive and very, and they want to be the superpower. They want to displace America. And you can imagine if China was the world's superpower, what the world would look like.
Yeah.
Now you go to Iran, and militarily they're not a big threat, but they're a massive threat when it comes to their ideology, because the Shia Islam's intention is to start World War III because they believe it will accelerate the return of the Mahdi, which is the imam who never died, and in their doctrine, it says that he's going to come back and basically do what the Bible says Jesus is doing, to come back and defeat evil and restore all things to the way God intended it. They think the Mahdi's going to do that and Jesus is going to help him do it. And they want to start that war because they believe it has to get so violent and chaotic that it forces the Mahdi to come back and fix it. And they think they can create those conditions. And that's very dangerous. And they openly say this all the time. North Korea, of course, you know, the threat from them is that they're just so extreme when it comes to their isolation. And you know, they're obviously a military threat to their neighbors, but you know, if you look at it, their equipment is 1970s Soviet. Who even knows how much of their ammo would actually fire if they got in a war? And
they're struggling, population decline, and economically.
Oh yeah, their economy's been a disaster. I mean, there would be no North Korea if China wasn't giving them, you know, keeping them alive. And then Russia, I mean, they got a GDP of the state of Texas, and they can't beat the Ukrainian army. I mean, why are we worried about them?
Yeah. Is it the threat of nuclear?
Yes. Oh, absolutely. I mean, in fact, if you go back and map out the entire thing, the reason that we weren't successful in Afghanistan is because we didn't deal with the enemy's sanctuary in Pakistan. And the reason we didn't touch that was because Pakistan has nukes.
Yeah.
So yeah, a lot of that certainly comes into the calculus. What military capabilities does the adversary have, and would they be willing to employ them? And that's the other thing that keeping us in the superpower position helps prevent is another nuclear arms race, because there are a lot of countries that don't have nuclear weapons that are relying on us to protect them, and if they think that we can't, then they're likely to develop their own nukes.
One of the biggest and most disastrous military moments in the modern era is Biden's withdrawal from Afghanistan.
Yes.
You spent...
I spent 5 years in Afghanistan.
You spent 5 years in Afghanistan. You know maybe better than anyone on the planet the best way that we could have withdrawn, the best way that should have happened. Walk me through, you know, from your perspective.
Well, actually, my last job in Afghanistan, I was the operations officer for the NATO headquarters. And we could see the writing on the wall. This was during the Obama administration, and it looked like, we're going to pull the plug on this thing pretty quick. So we better set the conditions to successfully withdraw without handing everything back over to the Taliban. I mean, of course we wrote that plan, and we wrote it in extreme detail. We thought through every different permutation of how things could go. We consulted our NATO allies and the non-NATO countries that were helping us in Afghanistan. we took it to the president of Afghanistan, President Ghani, and his minister of Defense and Minister of Interior, and got their feedback on it. We took it to NATO headquarters in Brussels and briefed it there. And then we brought it back home, briefed it to the Pentagon and everybody else, and it was the plan. And then they threw the plan in the shredder and did something completely different.
I don't know what they did. They just left everything and skipped town?
Well, I mean, so I'll just, some of the fundamental pieces of the plan. First, we had a DEI problem in Afghanistan because we built their military to be diversified. So as an example, if you were a Pashto from one of the southern provinces and you joined the military, you got sent to a non-Pashto province. You'd go up north or out west or somewhere. And they did that because they were concerned that we train these guys up in these modern military tactics and we give them this modern equipment, and now they just go back to working for a warlord again because it's so tribal there. So basically it was break up the tribes and diversify all these units, get them mixed up with all different people from different places, which sounded great until you look at the operating environment and you realize these people are completely tribal. Everything is about your family, your tribe, and your clan, which is a grouping of tribes that are all, basically same sort of, they're the same, from the same place, speak the same language, all that stuff. Well, the problem was when the Taliban threatened someplace, and let's say here I am, Private Fuller in the Afghan army, I'm a Pashto, and I got sent to one of the northern provinces. I'm up in Mazar-e Sharif now because they don't want me back down in my home footprint. Well, as soon as the Taliban attack my village, my dad, my brother, all my uncles, everyone are going to call me and tell me you have to come home and defend the tribe, the family, the village. And it's an honor system. I mean, it is mandatory. They have to go. And so they go AWOL and they go home to fight at home, leaving their unit that they just left shorthanded. So the first step in the whole thing was put everybody back in their tribal footprint.
Yeah.
So they're strong against the Taliban, and they didn't even start that. Second one was we were going to keep Bagram Airfield till the very last because Bagram was way out on the Shimali Plain, out in the open, never been attacked, at least successfully. Almost out of range of rockets or mortars or anything like that. They had to fire 107 millimeter rockets to get them all the way into the airfield. 2 10,000-foot runways, enough barrack space to hold 60,000 people, a world-class hospital, dining facilities to feed that many people 3 meals a day, enough fuel and ammunition to last us for a decade. And all we had to do was bring anyone that we were evacuating to Bagram, and they could stay there as long as needed until we could fly airplanes in. We could have flown 757s in there and picked people up and taken them out. And that was the plan. We were going to use helicopters to go out to marshaling areas and bring everybody to that airfield. And that airfield is the first thing we closed. And we did it in the middle of the night without even telling our allies that we were going to do it. So it's almost, if you tried to intentionally screw it up, it would be hard to intentionally do it as badly as they did. And I think it was some of it intentional.
That's what I was going to ask. What would be the motive for some of the strategy of why they did what they did?
It made absolutely no sense. To reduce ourselves down to a footprint where the only airfield available for evacuation was the Kabul International Airport.
Right.
Complete lunacy.
Yeah.
because that airport is sitting in a bowl surrounded by mountains, and you can't take off a fully loaded aircraft from that runway. And so you've just automatically limited your capacity for either people coming in or going out because of that. And of course, runways, taxiways, parking space, all that get really busy. And it wasn't easily defendable. It's sitting right in a giant urban area, so you're surrounded by people, unlike Bagram. So yeah, it seems like an intentionally stupid decision.
Yeah. And did you know that that nation basically was going to reject forms of democracy and they wanted the Taliban, or what was that dynamic like?
No, the Afghans hate the Taliban. No, they don't want them in charge. But they also understood that if they're not in charge, who's going to be, And really, it's who's the strongest gets to run the show. And so we were hoping that would be the Afghan government, the Afghan army. And in time, we could have got there, but we abandoned the project, in midstream. Anybody knows that if you're gonna change the governmental structure and history of a country, it's going to take some time. You're not going to just flip a switch. So to teach them about democracy, I mean, they were starting to understand, and certainly their military was really good. We had some super high-end Afghan units, and the commandos and the Tejas counter-terrorist force that our special ops forces trained, they were incredible. But one of the things that happened is they captured a bunch of those commandos down around Kandahar and executed them in the street. Mm. And so all of the regular army guys go, if that could happen to commandos, we don't have a chance, because everyone in the Afghan army knew the commandos were the gold standard of their force. And for them to get slaughtered like that really demoralized the rest of them. But the other thing that happened is the Taliban aren't stupid. They knew who all the provincial and district governors were, and they knew which ones they could influence. And so before the withdrawal was even complete, they were already paying governors to leave the country. Mm. And they just bought them off. Yeah. And then they took over. They walked in and took over that province without firing a shot.
Do you miss anything about Afghanistan?
Well, I really love the food. I do. I've got some wonderful Afghan friends, or did have. I don't know where they are now. I know some of my good friends went to the Panjshir Valley, and they're part of the resistance. But some of them I haven't heard from since the withdrawal. They're probably dead.
What do you think is happening in Europe right now?
Well, Europe has invited in so many Muslims that they are going to be a Muslim nation, and all of Europe's going to be Muslim majority in probably about a decade.
Yeah.
And it's just a simple matter of birth rates.
Are these Sharia?
Well, yeah. I mean, they're Muslims, so yeah, they're gonna demand that Sharia law be enforced if they're in charge, and when they are in charge. Yeah. Well, look, the mayor of London is a Muslim. The most popular name in about 6 European countries of a newborn male is Mohammed. Birth rates are at 8 to 1, 8 compared to less than 2 for any of the European Union countries. So they've got that as an issue. And the only way to fix that is, again, change the ideology. Mm-hmm. And the only way to keep Europe Christian is to evangelize the Muslims that are living there now and let them see the light of the gospel and come to Jesus, and then we'll be fine. But I'm not seeing that. That's not working because there's no one in Europe that's evangelizing them.
Yeah.
and they won't assimilate.
You talked about in Texas, the population of Muslims is growing and they're building an entire Muslim city.
Yeah. I think it's East Plano, Texas. I heard about. I think it's like 1,000 high-end houses and a Muslim cultural center and mosque and all that, and it's separate from the rest of society. They're going to sit it out and isolate themselves from everyone else. Not a good thing.
Mm-hmm. No, I think it's a really dangerous thing. And I feel like there was a lot of persecution against Christians in terms of freedom of speech in the previous administration. I had heard about certain city councils saying pastors have to turn their sermons in for approval before they could preach. I saw a church in California put a Bible verse on a billboard and they had to take it down because it was offensive to some people. I mean, just things that are you don't imagine happening in the United States. I knew of somebody that actually was arrested in the United States, spent time in jail for preaching the gospel. To me, that's crazy. My prayer is in this current administration that that's not happening. That there's a lifting of that, and this is an opportunity for Christians to actually step up. The Bible says the righteous take it by force. It's okay to be aggressive for the kingdom.
Absolutely. I mean, why would you, if you were a pastor and your city council tried to squelch your message, why would you tolerate that?
Yeah. I mean, it's absurd.
I mean, my pastor down in Colorado Springs, there was a front page headline in the paper that he broke the law because he was preaching politics. Well, maybe they missed it, but the American Revolution was generated off of sermons from preachers who were preaching against totalitarian governments and against the king. That's what got everybody stirred up to actually, take the leap and decide that they were going to fight the most powerful military that had ever existed with a bunch of farmers and shopkeepers and blacksmiths. And that ability to preach the truth from the pulpit is what made America what it is. And we can't let that go.
Well, in a lot of ways, the history of Christianity in the 2,000 years it's existed has been pastors, leaders, preachers, even lay people responding to a call to stand up against, really infiltration or corruption and bring a more prosperous future to everyone around them. I mean, you think even the Protestant Reformation,
right?
My take on some of it was precursors to Wycliffe, who was sort of looking around and saying, this is a pay for play because there's friars and things like that are paying money to get an opportunity to speak to the crowd, essentially. And people couldn't read Latin, so the Bible was only in Latin, and they were just using the pulpit to share whatever propaganda that they wanted to share. And so Wycliffe had the genius idea to say, every person actually has the ability and should have the right to have the Bible in their own language.
Exactly.
And so taking it from Latin to English, and it was pushing against the corruption of the Church of England in some ways. It was pushing against the corruption of the Catholic Church, and it allowed an amazing opportunity to be birthed where now you and I on our phone have the Bible in every language and 100 different translations in English.
If you look at what our founders wrote, our country wouldn't exist if the Bible hadn't been available to them. Their number one reference source for the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence was the Bible. And they say that really clearly in every place that you want to read about that time period. And so, yeah, the Bible was absolutely critical. If it would have not been in the hands of individual citizens, we wouldn't have the country we live in.
We're in some ways at a turning point as a nation. You talked about DEI earlier. There was such a weird movement spreading across America that lacked any intelligence at all. I couldn't make sense of it, like how they were arriving at certain things. Like the big issue in pop culture is like the men and women's sports, as an example. Like I don't, how could anybody even process that and say that that's an okay or all right thing? And then because of legacy and dominant media, there was no really popular contrary voice, and so it felt like what actually was a minority was the big, majority on these viewpoints, and so
Yeah.
it just got pushed down and shoved down.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And I think the Lord has given us some previews of how bad things are about to get. Because if people can believe that a man can have a baby, or that you can change your chromosomes and change your sex, we've got some serious problems. People actually believe that stuff. Or if I feel like a man, but I feel like a woman, but I'm really a man, so I'll just pretend to be a woman and expect everybody to treat me like one. It's just nuts. But you look at what happened during COVID. I was always wondering, what is this mark of the beast thing, and how could it ever come about where every person, if you don't have it, you can't work, you can't hold a job, you can't, buy or sell. Well, COVID is a good example of how every country on the planet responded exactly the same way and the wrong way, simultaneously. And so it had to be organized.
Yep.
It's not just happenstance that everybody chooses this as the way we're going to deal with this crisis, and they pick the wrong answer in every case. And so there's another way that you can see things can get off the rails really quick, and massive numbers of people buy the lie, which is exactly why Jesus warned us what things were going to be like, where knowledge will increase, but deception is going to increase right alongside of it. And this level of deception is just incredible. And now with AI connected to a quantum computer, we can't even imagine how much deception can get generated that looks absolutely authentic and true.
Yeah, I think it's going to be almost indistinguishable. And I have some solutions in my mind that I think should be done, at least on video content and photo content, to verify that it is a real photo. And I think there's some ways you can encrypt it and things like that. And even when you're uploading on some of the social platforms for it to be seen, nobody's doing that yet. That has to be the natural evolution. It has to be marked as verified real, I think.
I agree.
As opposed to generate. Because I saw a side-by-side video from a movie trailer. And the movie trailer cost $500,000 in real life to shoot. And then they remade it using AI, and it cost nothing to remake it. It looked not identical, but 95% of the same.
Yeah.
You could use it in a movie trailer. That is pretty wild.
Well, if you think about it, everybody's tried to counterfeit stuff all through human history, and they're just going to counterfeit the truth, dress it up and make it look true, make it really believable, and they're getting good at it. Now, a lot of people are doing this nowadays.
Do you think that the United States should enter into an agreement with Greenland, or do you think that we should try to buy Greenland?
I don't think we need any more permanent territory to defend, but a military base there would certainly be helpful, not just for us, but for everybody in the region. So, yeah, I think we should just negotiate a place to have a military presence that can provide early warning and actually, deal with a threat if it would appear. So, yeah, I'd rather do it that way personally. I think we've got way too many military bases. Not only around the world we've got too many, but we've also got too many here in America. So I think there's a good chance we're going to whittle some of that down. You take Incirlik Air Base in Turkey, massive airfield. And of course, we pay a fortune to have a presence there. And then every time we really need to use it for something serious, like Desert Storm, or, any of these post 9/11 operations, is they haven't let us operate out of there and run combat sorties. So why do we keep a giant air base in Turkey? Mm-hmm. Matter of fact, why do we even keep Turkey as a NATO ally?
Well, I think that actually births a bigger question, and that would be, what was the purpose of NATO? Does it still have a purpose today? Or is there an opportunity for this current administration to forge a path forward with some kind of new sort of military global alliance? What's your take? I mean, you served at a very high level in NATO. I mean,
Yeah.
you know in depth about.
So NATO was a military alliance designed to contest the Soviet Union during the Cold War.
At 1970.
Yeah, well, it started before that, but yeah, I mean, that was really the point, was the Soviet Union, the communists are trying to become the superpower, and, we got to prevent that from happening. And all the countries in Europe were really nervous about the massive Soviet army sitting right there on their continent. So that's why the alliance was formed. Unfortunately, it very quickly morphed from a military alliance to a political alliance. And all of the leaders in NATO are politicians. They're not generals. I mean, when it comes to policy making and stuff. So, and then once the Soviet Union collapsed, what's the justification for keeping NATO? But rather than start looking at, is there a reason, should we modify this treaty and adjust it to the current realities? Instead, we kept growing NATO. Mm-hmm. After we told the Soviets we will not do this, we let all kinds of countries into NATO after the Soviets.
Basically any nature. I mean, what was the most recent one? Poland?
No, I don't remember the most recent. No, Poland. Who was the most recent?
Finland?
Yeah, I think that some of those Nordic countries are getting in and wanting. But the ones that got the Russians irritated was Romania, Yugoslavia, the Czech Republic, all those ones along the border, Estonia, Latvia. We let all those in immediately. The only one we didn't let in was the Ukraine, and we didn't let them in because they're a kleptocracy and they were too corrupt, and we didn't want them in NATO. We let them participate in a couple of NATO operations in the 90s, and they performed so badly and they were so corrupt and incompetent and nobody wanted them in NATO. Now, obviously, that's a whole different scenario. Now they've got some unbelievably experienced and well-trained soldiers with good equipment, so things have changed a lot. But bottom line here is George Washington warned us about foreign entanglements. And there's no reason that we need a military alliance against the Soviet Union anymore, or against Russia. So, yeah, I think if we keep a treaty like NATO, it needs to be modified to meet the current threats of today. So who's doing anything about Iran, who's a completely rogue regime, the world's #1 sponsor of terrorism, Hezbollah, Hamas, you go down the list, the IRGC, Quds Force, all these people they're really dangerous, and nobody's contesting Iran.
Not only that, the American government shipped them hard cash.
Oh, yeah. Well, don't get me started on that. Yeah, they wouldn't. I mean, you look, the whole Iranian Revolution started in 1979, and all it's brought about is misery for the Iranian people.
Yeah.
The Ayatollahs in charge have been a complete disaster, not just for Iran, but for the whole region. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I mean, there's another example. How about we get the Europeans to help us deal with that threat and prevent them from getting a nuke? Because the day the Iranians have a nuclear weapon is the day they deploy it.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah, that one's the NATO alliance. Yeah, I've advocated for a long time that the need for it is over, and let's recalibrate it and get it back on track with what to address the threats of the here and now, not the 1970s.
It seems like that would be the logical response, but there's very little logical things happening. One of the biggest things that is happening, people disagree or agree, is the Department of Government Efficiency. And I think Americans either think it's a lie or we're surprised, depends on which side of the aisle they're on, about some of the findings of where the U.S. government was spending literally hundreds of billions of dollars.
Yeah. I don't understand how someone could think that that's not true, especially if every April when you file your taxes. I mean, that's all our money that they took and gave away. And really what they were doing is giving it to each other. Mm-hmm. They were taking our money and sharing it with each other.
Yep.
And I got zero tolerance for that. And the truth is, we will lose our superpower status if we don't fix our economy, because we cannot continue to dig deeper and deeper into debt.
Right.
And
that makes no sense to me either. I mean, we're just perpetually extending our debt. I mean, what is it, over $30 trillion right now?
That debt clock, I can't even watch it anymore. It's insanity. And it's going to damage our children and grandchildren. We're sinking them in that debt. And so, we've got to completely reform all that. One way is to just re-energize our economy by what President Trump is doing with these tariffs, and also releasing all these government restrictions that prevent people from creating wealth. And we got to get all those rules out of the way. But the biggest thing is we got to deal with entitlements. Yeah. I mean, nobody wants to talk about Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, even though when all those amendments were passed, those bills were passed, they acknowledged it's not going to last. It's not sustainable.
Well, it can't right now. Social Security is going to go bankrupt at this current rate. What, in 10 years?
You're not going to get it.
Yeah.
I started drawing mine because I said, what the heck, I better get it now because it's going to go dry.
Yeah.
When I turned 65. But I'll tell you, look, what the only thing you can do is grandfather in the people that have paid into it for their whole lives. And all the new folks say, look, you're not going to get this. So if you want a retirement plan, you better build it yourself. You better start saving money for your retirement, because the government's not going to bail you out in your old age. But you know what would be even better than that? Is that we go back to God's plan, which is your family takes care of you when you get old.
Yeah, it's not a bad idea. Not a bad idea. Some people don't have a family, and that's a drawback on that, but there's options, obviously. And that's where the church steps up.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, the national debt is a massive issue. That's the elephant in the room in every major conversation when we're talking about America's future. But nobody wants to deal with it because it's political suicide. It's like trying to get rid of ethanol, one of the stupidest programs ever created, where you take 55 bushels of corn to convert it into 1 gallon of gasoline. And we're not even talking about all the fuel that it took to plow the ground, plant the corn, put on the herbicides and pesticides and all that, then harvest it, then take it to the factory where they make the ethanol. Well, we're never going to get rid of that. You know why? Because it all starts in Iowa every election.
Yeah, that's exactly why.
And if you go to Iowa and say, I'm against ethanol subsidies, you're not going to get the nominate. You're not going to get the vote there for sure.
How do you think J.D. Vance is doing as a vice president?
I think he's really walking a tough road and doing a great job of it. It's hard to walk in as sort of an unknown guy, not a big name politician, and then to be married, to be joined in partnership with a guy that's so controversial as President Trump. It's a hard thing for him to do, but I think he's doing a great job of it. And what I really like about him is he doesn't beat around the bush. He says what he thinks, he says what he believes, he says what's true, and he doesn't apologize for it.
Have you seen a change in the countenance of Trump after he almost died?
Oh, no doubt. No doubt. I think everybody saw that. I can't put my finger on what it is, but I absolutely believe that he understands that God intervened and saved him.
He feels like he's become the father of a nation.
Yeah, that's a good point too.
He was never known for being a great husband, I don't think, but he was always known as being a great father. And I think we're getting to see that aspect of his nature come out.
Yeah, I do too.
And I think even, this is maybe a little controversial or a hot take, but I kind of feel like some of Elon Musk's affection towards him is almost looking to Donald Trump as a fatherly figure.
I love that video of Elon's son walking over to the Marine One with the president. And just heartwarming.
It's like he's adopted him as his own grandson. We've seen that same clip with all of Trump's grandchildren over the years.
Yep.
And, to me, it's like, man, Trump looks like the father of a nation right now. And it's what we need. Yeah,
it's what we need. And, people say this all the time, but it's almost like a platitude. But there is much more that unites us as Americans than there is that separates us. And we've got to get back to that unity, and I think that's what the president's bringing. Now, there are some that are not going to get to be a part of that, but it's going to be their own choice that they don't want to participate. And there are some people that, like he's doing right now, there are some people that are here that don't belong here. They're here illegally, or they're anti-American, and they're working against us. And those people, why would you let them stay in your country?
Mm-hmm.
I actually think there ought to be a way to revoke American citizenship.
I like that. Where do we send them?
Yeah, they can go wherever they want, just not here.
What do you think about Trump's gold card? People can pay $5 million.
I mean, we'll see. Who knows? It sounds good, but we'll see how many takers there are, But the premise of it is absolutely right, which is bring in people with talent and experience and education. Don't bring in people that we have to provide all of that to.
Yeah, exactly. And that they're going to bring jobs with them. They're going to bring family. I mean, they say, I seen this report like, oh, there's not enough people around the world that even have that amount of money that could bring, their assets to the United States. But they'd be paying that money for them and their, descendants. And so actually that number could get high.
It might, yep. And if it brings in real quality people, high talent people, great. I'm all for it.
One of my favorite things about this administration that seems different, a lot of the people, not everybody, but a lot of the people in the cabinet are like legit, for real Christians, outspoken believers.
Right.
I don't know if there's been an administration, certainly not in my lifetime, and you can inform me otherwise, but that have been that passionate about their faith, that it's actually, they're actually saying they're making prayerful decisions on behalf of our nation.
I think we've always had that, but nobody's talked much about it. I mean, I can go back all the way back to, early 80s, and I remember, cabinet members and members of Congress that talked about their Christian faith and, would commonly say, well, we're going to have to pray about that and figure out what the right thing to do is. Instead of, it's just what you're saying. But I don't think it's something new. I think the difference is now people feel comfortable talking about it.
Mm-hmm. It's a huge reversal from just a year ago.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, General Fuller, this has been an amazing conversation.
Yeah, it has. I appreciate it. I enjoyed it. It's always fun getting together with you, brother.
Come on, man. We got to do more of it. Anything else you want to add?
No, I just thank you for having me on.